my father was born in 1906 in the Eastern Mediterranean in a small island called Cyprus. At 14, he boarded an English steamer and he landed in Alexandria, where he was met by his brother, who took him to Cairo, which was at that time in the 20s a bustling place. When I realized how young he was when he left, I found it remarkable that he was a man who kept his family very, very close all of his life, even though after he left at 14, he never returned until 32 years later. His parents he never saw again, but he was an avid correspondent, as were they all, and they kept in touch through letters, many letters back and forth. I can remember receiving them at home in their blue envelopes with aerogram on them. He left Cairo after 2 years, deciding that he wanted to come to the United States, and he came to Wheeling, West Virginia, a vastly different place than Cairo. But he had another brother who was there. So at this point, Harry is 18. After several years in Wheeling, he went to New York City. With a lot of courage, but I think not a lot of confidence, he went to see the editor of a Greek newspaper in New York called the National Herald. He went on to write articles. He worked behind the scenes and ultimately became business manager of the newspaper. Once again he moved and he went to East Liverpool, Ohio, which was near Beaver, as you all know, and he had another brother there who at this point had a thriving restaurant, and he went to work for him. He met my mother through a friend, through someone who said, you know, Harry, there is a wonderful woman in Beaver, Pennsylvania, just up the river, and I think you should meet her. So in 1941, my parents were married, and they went to Washington, D.C. on their honeymoon, a place neither of them had been to before. And indeed, they had a very beautiful, loving companionship marriage. They were very lucky and very suited to each other. It is important to note that my mother grew up in Beaver and knew Beaver long before it became a passion of my father's. My grandfather was a man of few words. He rented a storeroom on 3rd Street from a man named Lewis Mitchell. He was open 24 hours a day, and of course it was a restaurant. He made his own pies, and his niche marketing technique was a very good cup of coffee for a nickel. In the early 40s, after my parents married, my father went into business with my grandfather. He tried to persuade my very conservative grandfather to think bigger, to enlarge the restaurant, to take advantage of the fact that the economy was booming and there were no other restaurants in the area. I don't think it was an easy sell. However, Mr. Mitchell, who sold my grandfather the lunchroom, owned the butcher shop next door and had a storeroom for rent. So that's what they did. They rented the storeroom and they turned it into a dining room. And then it became not the Beaver Lunch, but the Beaver Restaurant, which is what you all remember it being. So by the 1950s, the restaurant was on its way to becoming a center of the town. It was a place for news. It was a place for social connections. It was a place for coffee and a piece of homemade pie. So much of what happened that I remember from the Heritage Foundation had its embryonic beginning in the restaurant, with people coming in and friends of my father's talking and exchanging ideas and sitting down and continuing and having meetings. So it became the launching place, perhaps, for what we are celebrating here tonight.
In the year 1967, I do recall going into the Beaver restaurant and being buttonholed literally by Harry Phillips, who said to me, "You know, you people have something special in this town and you ought to do something about it." Now, for those of you who knew Harry, he was a very intelligent man, well read. He knew the history of the town probably better than almost any of us at that point in time. And he was a good writer, and he was very serious about what he said. He said, "You people have something special here and you ought to do something about it." Well, as you know, Harry himself took the bull by the horns and formed this organization in 1967.
Well, of course, when you say early days, it's Harry Phillips. It was his whole dream that we needed to have to preserve our heritage. And I think he originally would talk about a historical society. And he loved his country and he loved Beaver, and he just couldn't understand that we didn't have a group already together. And I know people that would come into the restaurant, he started talking, and he knew a lot of people, of course, because he was a very personable restaurateur. He just didn't cook in the kitchen. He was out talking to everybody, and he knew everybody. And he began to know what people would be good to help him at certain things. And he just started talking. We need to get together. We need to do this. But he was very precise about what he wanted done and how he wanted it done. He was a perfectionist himself with his restaurant, and he expected perfection from all of us too, which was good, because that's the reason that we got rolling the way we did, so to speak. And Pauline Copeland and I were working in the early years, kind of getting everything together as far as getting the chairs set up and getting refreshments, and he wanted to be sure we had more than enough chairs, more than enough refreshments. Everything had to be just so. He also was very aware that he was an immigrant, that he had come from Greece. And I think he appreciated what we have here more than maybe some of the rest of us do, because we've lived here most of our lives, many of us, and we just don't realize how lucky we are.
From reading some secretarial reports and so on, I did get a sense that with the organization that Harry Phillips and his contemporaries started, that it was somewhat of almost a social club in some ways, because they would meet in people's homes because they really didn't have a permanent place. But on the other hand, they did seem to have objectives in mind, and really in those early years was one of the chief things that the folks did was they wrote a lot of books and tried to record the history of Beaver very early. And many of these publications are on sale down at our shop in the museum. And so they really did look, as Harry says to the people, "You really don't know what you have here." Well, I think they went out early on and tried by writing in these books like about Sam Brady and Fort McIntosh and the churches in Beaver and the squares and things like that, that they tried at an early time in our organization to really start recording the unique history of our community.
The first board meeting that I ever went to, the major subject of discussion, this was back in 1970 or 71 or something like that, was how to raise enough money to just operate the organization, to send out the notices and so on, and to create programs. And the dues, I think, were $5, and there was a discussion about whether we should raise it to maybe $5.50.
Some of my early recollections of the Heritage Society, the same members in the Heritage Society were members of the Beaver Rotary. And those were the early people I remember as Norman Falk and Joe Carver, Harry Phillips, and they were all members of our Rotary Club.
There are others who had a significant role in making the organization become what it is today. One of these was Frank Carver, and a lot of people know Frank either personally or by name. They remember him. He was the athletic director of the University of Pittsburgh at that time. But Frank was the one who provided the initiative behind the archaeological restoration of the site of Fort McIntosh. And he gave it the push that it needed to get it going and help make it happen. And in so doing, he researched a lot of the history that went with that site and ultimately wrote a couple of books about it. Another person who had an important role was Bob Firestone. Bob Firestone was a good personal friend. He was kind of the real historian of this organization for a number of years. Bob was an excellent writer, and he did his homework and knew how to research, find out the background of things. He relied a lot on the history of Beaver County by Dr. Bousman.
Well, this organization has been blessed with some really, really quality people, but one in particular that I had a fondness for, and I always thought he was very detailed in all the work that he did, was Bob Firestone. Many of the things that are written today that we still have as part of this organization were originally researched and written by Bob Firestone, who really had a passion for this organization and was just a wonderful guy.
And that's where another one of our wonderful people in Beaver stepped forward and helped us tremendously. That was Scott Bliss. Now, Scott knew the business of fundraising. Scott had been the development director for, once upon a time, Geneva College and later for the Pittsburgh Symphony. And Scott knew and knows how you go about raising substantial amounts of money. There is a formula, and Scott wrote the book. Another person that had a major impact on the organization and has to be Blanche Shaw. And so Gene Hamilton and Blanche Shaw together helped to fund the historical markers that you now see at the Fort McIntosh site. When the P&LE Railroad went out of business, they sold off all of their real estate and their properties, and the freight station building and the property around it was acquired by Beaver Borough, very wisely. And we went out and had lunch with Blanche, and I told her what we had in mind to do and what we thought it was going to cost, probably a couple $100,000 or so. She said, "I'll give you $20,000 to help you get started." And she gave me a check that day for $20,000. When that happens, you have no choice but to move ahead with the project. And so that was really how our historical museum project got off the ground and got going.
We knew our own member, Chuck Copeland, who is a contractor in his own right and has worked on many buildings in Beaver. And so we approached Chuck about being a construction manager. And thankfully, Chuck agreed to take on the task. And so he directly would hire contractors and pulled minor miracles all the time. And we put that building into the shape that it was in. And Jason Foster was another person, Jim Foster's son, who worked with him and did a lot of the carpentry and millwork. And so all that work you see down there is they're doing. Several of us went in and we sanded down the floors of the freight station, and they mixed up a glue like Elmer's glue and took the old sawdust that came up and mixed it in and filled in all the cracks between the planks on the wood floor. So, and that's held up today. It's amazing. Chuck went out one day and they were tearing down the kid house across from the Wooden Angel. And he's looking at the front entrance and he says, "You know, that looks pretty close to what we could use in that one doorway we're going to put in." And he measured it, it was within an inch, and lo and behold, we have the front entrance of the kid house as our main entrance to our museum. So Chuck was always doing things like this. And you know, without his due diligence and great work and management, we wouldn't have had probably half the museum we do today. So there are a lot of people were involved. We had many volunteers that worked to do the construction and the painting and the things that we could do as volunteers. So, you know, I think we were all very pleased in the fact a year later we won a national award for the best local history museum in the country.
That was kind of a fascinating story. There was a man named Skip Skosich who bought an old house on Buffalo Street, across from the old Clark Park Cemetery. And he sent an employee down to start tearing it down. And the guy came back and said, "Boss, that place is made out of railroad ties." Now, it wasn't railroad ties. It turned out it was really logs, the logs that you can see in the log house now.
Again, Chuck Copeland came back into the picture as our construction manager. That was also at the time the county jail was being demolished. And so with a combination of rebuilding the logs basically in the same configuration as they were in the original house, and then using the stone from the jail and the work from Amish workers that were actually carpooled down from north of here, and they would work and someone would have to carpool them back. The log house was built. We have a basement in there which a lot of people don't know about. And again, Chuck built this ingenious trap door that gets you down there. And again, he found a stairway because the parking garage beside the courthouse was being built, and one of the buildings was going down, and there was this beautiful metal stairway, which is now the stairway into the basement. So again, Chuck was very ingenious in finding these materials that were worked into our structures and our buildings, and you know, we just would have been at a loss, you know, not to have had Chuck working on both of these projects for us.
The story of the organization is really the story of people. People, places, and events, if you will, but it's people who make an organization. And I have had the wonderful privilege and pleasure of being associated with some exceptional people in this organization throughout the nearly 40 years that I've been a part of it.
The people I've been involved with in this organization are outstanding and committed far beyond an average volunteer. I've been on a number of boards and charitable organizations over the years. This group has a dedication and a commitment that I've never seen. And despite obvious differences, as any group might have, really work together for the common good and put its best interests at heart in all decision making. And it's so exciting to see that many people with that much talent pulling together for such a common cause.
And in various facets, people who work at the museum or who volunteer at the museum, people who are on the two boards and give of their time, people who put up the displays and write the newsletters and plan the programs, and all the girls who work as docents at the museum.
I like almost anything I do with this organization because people are just so willing to help. If you need help doing something, if I put out a call for help and I need 5 people, I probably have 7 or 8 volunteers. And I find that very rewarding.
And in fact, I just look at our organization today with the people, and again, it's the people who make it go and the volunteers. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another organization that's a historical organization that's as unique and talented with the people we have in all of the country.
I think there are some people that work awfully hard for the organization and don't get their name in the paper, and certainly don't get on a billboard anywhere, but just off the top of my head, I think back to the education program, Shirley Powell and her docents and associates that work so hard in that area. Very seldom do we hear people say, praise Jean Lloyd for the wonderful work she does with the museum gardens. I think those are certainly very special. And of course, Bob Smith is the guru of the organization, if you will. He's been involved since the beginning. Chuck Snitker is Mr. Everything to the organization. Midge and her crew of people that take care of the museum so well. And I don't think we can forget Ed McLaughlin's leadership in recent years has been very, very good. Mark Miner with the public relations aspect has been very special. And sometimes we forget our guy, Rich Pontillo from the post office, who's been such a wonderful person as a membership chairman of the organization and also participating in just everything we do.
Midge Sefton today with taking the collections, and again, she and her committee started that even before we had the museum with the artifacts and so on that had been collected in the basement of the Borough building, and started that procedure. And we're probably one of the better organized small museums, I'd say, in the country, just from looking at how she's very diligently cataloged everything.
We have a great time down there. We've tried to learn to call it the lower level because it sounds more classy than the basement, but we forget to call it that ourselves. So down in that lower level or that basement area, that's a great place to work. We have all of the archives down there. We probably have, 6,000 artifacts that are currently either on display or in storage. And when they come in, we have to look at them and decide, does it meet the mission to tell the story of Beaver, Bridgewater, Brighton Township, or Vanport? And if it does meet the mission of telling that, if it has some relevance to that, then we research it and try to find out where it's been for its lifetime. And we measure it and we weigh it and we write up a story about it, and we plug all of that into a computer. And in the meantime, we put it into something that's acid-free and put it on a shelf and log where it is and hope we can go back and find it again. Sometimes we can.
Most important in my memory is Laree Riley. She was a retired school teacher and school administrator, which gave her all the skills that she needed to deal with the people in the meetings that we set up to try to get the museum started. And of course, you can see what a wondrous thing it is by now. But, I give her all the credit in the world for being able to handle everything. There were a lot of controversies involved in where it was going to be and who was going to run it and how it was going to be arranged and so on. And Laree used all those skills that she had learned working with grade school kids to handle everybody.
And then I think of Bob Smith, and he's sort of like Mr. Everything to the organization since probably 1980 or so. It's the last 27 plus years that he's sort of been another one of the players of the glue that's helped keep this organization going.
Wow, there are so many people that are just so involved. All of the McLaughlins are very involved, and if they tell you they're going to do something, you know it's going to get done. Bob Smith is a very active person, and Bus Morton. And Bob Odell is just the kindest, most thorough individual. And if he says he's going to do something, he'll be there. Chuck Snitker is so organized. Oh, the man is just unbelievable. You ask him for something and he knows exactly where it is and how it got there and how long it's been there. And he'll find it for you. He's a very good individual. There are just so many. I hate to leave anybody out.
I can always recall this organization being involved in the Memorial Day Parade, the July 4th celebration, the Garrison Day. Many people don't realize that those are all events that this organization handles.
I can go back a few years. I think one of the highlights was the appearance of the Old Guard at the time of the dedication of Fort McIntosh. I used to go by and watch, even though I didn't participate in the dig that went on at Fort McIntosh, and I thought that was kind of special. In recent years, I see the development of the educational program built around the log house and the museum and the history tour of Beaver. I think that's become a very, very special part of our mission.
I would say, from an educational standpoint, Shirley Pyle's educational program that's been started now, probably going on 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, with the 1st and 5th graders every spring, that we are reaching down into the schools and teaching them a slice of history that they wouldn't get otherwise about our unique community and how it portrayed itself, or how it placed itself within both local history and the national history.
But it's the important things that we're doing here with educating our children, preserving the documents and the artifacts for the people, places, and events of the Beaver area, that I think future generations are really going to appreciate the work that's been done by this group of people. I do see this organization continuing to grow and work in conjunction with the school, the growth of our website, and working with the other the school districts to help continue to promote Beaver in the great place that it already is.
I'm amazed at the number and variety of activities that help bring the history of the Beaver area alive over many years, whether it's historic house tours, cemetery tours, fort rededications, activities such as our school, educational outreach programs. It's amazing how many ways history can be brought to life in all of the activities.
I see there being some growth, continued growth down at the museum and the log house. I see it continuing to grow and our website expanding, and I personally see us with the number of artifacts and items that we've accessioned over the past 10 years, as that I see us becoming a major research center for families and people that would like to research their heritage of the Beaver area, that maybe have grown up here, had businesses here, had families or grandparents in this area. We probably at this time have information about those families, and I can see us becoming a major research center for people that would like to do that research of those, either the family or businesses.
I think the organization can promote itself and should promote itself in greater ways over time. That includes increasing resources onto the web. In a 24/7 environment, we need to be relevant and accessible all around the world. There are Beaver people living everywhere, and we need to be able to reach them. We also need to continue our publishing efforts. We have a tremendous library of books, booklets, and pamphlets. The research and writing must continue, and we must continuously promote this to our younger people to do their own discovery voyage and to dig out the stories of the past. Those are two areas that we can continue to bring history to life through our website and through publishing.
We really need to invest in our students, our children that are coming through in the education programs at the museum, the children of the members of the Heritage Foundation, and do things that will invest in the children, because they are the future of our nation. So they certainly are the future of the Beaver Area Heritage Foundation. We need to get people involved that have the energy and the enthusiasm to carry this forward. They have to be willing to work. Quite frankly, if I'd worked this hard when I had a real job, I probably would have gotten paid more. But it's a great place to be, and we need to encourage them just to get involved a little bit. And if they're involved a little bit and can see what we're doing, they'll kind of gradually encroach into more and more of what's going on.
As we rush headlong into the future, our society is going to be fragmented like never before. There are going to be tremendous demands that draw people away from our community. There are going to be tremendous challenges in terms of education and making history come alive. Our society demands instant gratification. It's very hard to make history part of that. And yet I think the Heritage Foundation does a great job of taking historical subject matter and bringing it to life and bringing it into an excitement for our society.
The Heritage Foundation is here to stay. We know that. And it certainly has a very strong future. It's a central part of the community by now in so many ways. We have things to consider. We have, for the first time in our existence, we have money to work with.
I'm tickled to death to live in Beaver. I wouldn't want to live any other place. It's just a wonderful, wonderful town, and a lot of it's done because we're preserving our history here, and we have something to brag about. We really do. We have a wonderful location here.
I walked into the museum and I saw Harry's picture there, and I thought, oh, he would be so thrilled, because at the beginning he used to say, I want our children, I want all the children to know what life was like in Beaver back in those days, and if we don't get it written down, they're just not going to know. And it's so exciting to see those children that he was talking about now coming to the museum and getting all excited about taking the trolley tour, about playing the games that the children played back then, about seeing how they dressed and not believing, oh my goodness, they wore all those clothes, and hearing about how they cooked and being able to taste some of the food that's cooked over an open fire. He would be just thrilled to realize what all has come of what I think he really at the beginning thought would be just a group that got together to have meetings, and it's so much more than that, and there's so many people involved in so many aspects, and that to me is the biggie.
I just want to say that being part of the Beaver Area Heritage Foundation has really become an important part of my life, and I say that in all sincerity. I don't know what I'd be doing with myself today if it weren't for the Heritage Foundation. It's given me a reason to get out of bed every morning and gives me something to do on a volunteer basis, and it's a privilege to be a part of that and to work with the people that we have. In the next 20 years, the Heritage Foundation will still be the #1 organization and the moving force behind the borough of Beaver and this area.
Well, it's been a real pleasure working on this project for the Heritage Foundation. It's been interesting hearing all the nice comments about the history of the organization. I want to thank everybody that participated. I especially want to thank Tom Dowland for all of his expertise in this venture. And again, it's been my pleasure to have a small part in it. So.